My mother didn't build up to it. She didn't ask about my work at the museum, didn't mention the rainy Portland weather. She didn't even pretend this was a normal Tuesday call. She said, "You are not welcome at Thanksgiving until you make this right." Her voice was flat, final, like she was reading a verdict she'd already signed. I was standing in my small apartment kitchen, overlooking a street slick with autumn rain. One hand was wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. The other was gripping my phone so tightly, my knuckles were white. I'm Sloane Caldwell. I'm 35 years old, and for most of my life, I've been the person people turn to when the past is a mess. I'm a museum archivist. I spend my days with brittle documents and forgotten artifacts, piecing together stories from the things people leave behind. My job is to find the truth, handle it with care, and put it in the right order. That night, I didn't need an archival folder to know what this call was really about. It wasn't about Thanksgiving. It wasn't about family harmony. It was the same old demand, just dressed up in festive, turkey-scented wrapping. Co-sign a $28,000 car loan for my younger sister, Ainsley. Smile while I did it. And act grateful for the opportunity to set my own financial stability on fire to keep her warm. I had already said no, twice, calmly, clearly, and with a finality I thought was unmistakable. My mother took a breath on the other end of the line, and then her voice changed. It dropped into that low, quiet register she used when she wanted a wound to be clean, deep, and unforgettable. "Maybe it's time you knew," she said, the words perfectly spaced. "You were adopted." She let the silence hang in the air, a weapon in itself. She was waiting for me to shatter, waiting for the gasp, the tears, the frantic questions. She was waiting for me to feel so unmoored, so desperate to belong, that I would agree to anything just to get back to solid ground. Instead, I said, "Then perhaps you should stop acting like I owe you interest on a life you chose to give me." I didn't hear my sister in the background, but I heard my mother's composure vanish. The silence that followed wasn't strategic, it was stunned. Before I tell you what she said next, and why that Thanksgiving dinner ended with a single gray folder on the table and an untouched pumpkin pie, tell me, what time is it for you right now? And where in the world are you watching from? I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel. The thing about a sentence like, "You were adopted," isn't the shock itself, not right away. The first thing that happens is your mind becomes an archive of its own. It starts pulling old files out of storage, dusting them off, and lining them up on a long table under a bright, unforgiving light. Suddenly, moments that were once just confusing now looked like evidence. The 16th birthday where my sister Ainsley got a perfectly decent used hatchback, and I got a lecture on the importance of earning things for yourself. The college years. I worked 2 jobs, took out my own loans, and paid them off meticulously, all while listening to my mother, Judith, praise the concept of unconditional family support every single time Ainsley had a little shortfall on her rent. The Thanksgivings, where I bought half the groceries, cooked most of the side dishes, and was still called difficult or ungenerous if I asked a simple, practical question about my sister's finances. Look, my mother loved me, I know she did, but her love always felt like it came with a meticulously kept ledger. She packed my lunches. She remembered I was allergic to penicillin. She drove me to piano lessons for a decade. And then, later, she'd remind me of those fevers she nursed, or those rainy drives to lessons, whenever I hesitated to rescue someone else. It wasn't a gift, it was a deposit, and she was always ready to make a withdrawal. That's what made the adoption line so uniquely cruel. It wasn't that it erased my childhood. It's that she had kept it hidden like a loaded pistol in a bedside table for 35 years. And the very first time I refused to obey a direct order, she pulled it out and aimed it right at my heart. She was using the story of my beginning to threaten me with an end. 10 minutes after I hung up on her, my phone lit up again. Ainsley, I let it ring once, twice, 7 times. Then a text message appeared. Real mature, Sloane. Mom is hysterical. You could fix this by just saying sorry. I stared at the screen and a laugh escaped me. It was a short, sharp, ugly sound. Ainsley had a black belt in turning her manufactured wants into everyone else's five-alarm crisis. She was 31 years old. She was charming when she needed something, constitutionally allergic to consequences, and always, always surrounded by a cloud of perfectly constructed explanations that were never, ever her fault. This car loan wasn't about transportation. She had a car, a trendy little coupe with a lease payment she was already struggling to make. This new loan was for a sleek imported SUV. The kind with a starting price that made you wince and an options list that made you laugh. It was a vanity purchase, pure and simple, wrapped in a flimsy narrative about needing something, safer for the Oregon winter. I knew this because 2 weeks earlier, before the polite no had escalated to a firm, absolutely not, Ainsley had shown me the brochure. She'd gushed about the panoramic sunroof, the Burmester sound system, and the oyster-colored leather interior. Need has never come with oyster-colored leather. She showed up at my apartment the next evening. It was raining again. She wore a stylish trench coat I knew for a fact she couldn't afford and an expression of practiced outrage. I opened the door just enough to talk. She pushed it the rest of the way open and stepped inside without being invited. "You really did it," she said, her voice trembling with what she clearly thought was righteous anger. "You upset Mom so much she had to tell you." I closed the door behind her. I didn't raise my voice. "No," I said, "Mom decided to use cruelty as a negotiation tactic because I wouldn't co-sign a loan for your ego." Ainsley flinched, just for a second, then she recovered. "It's not my ego. I need that car." "You need a budget," I said, my voice still level. "And you need a bank that's willing to overlook your credit score. You don't need my signature as collateral for your lifestyle." Her face hardened. The victim act evaporated, replaced by something colder. "You always do this. You think you're better than us just because you're so organized. That's your whole personality, isn't it? Tidying things up." "No," I said. I folded my hands in front of me so she couldn't see them shaking. "I think I learned very early that no one was coming to rescue me. And you learned very early that someone always would." That one landed. I saw it in her eyes, a flicker of something that looked like truth. But then she went for the kill. She took the weapon my mother had handed her and tried to use it herself. "Maybe Mom told you because she's just tired of pretending," she whispered. "Maybe you were never really one of us. And this just proves it." And there it was. Not anger. Strategy. She wanted that line to hurt. She wanted it to make me feel so alone that I would scramble for any scrap of belonging she offered, even if it came with a $28,000 price tag. But here's the thing. Something in me had already shifted. The foundation had cracked, yes, but it was letting in light, not just cold. I looked at my sister, this woman I had spent my entire adult life protecting from herself, and I felt a strange, quiet calm settle over me. "If being one of you means I have to sign any piece of paper you slide across the table and call it love," I said, "then no. Maybe I was never built for this family's business model." She folded her arms, her face a mask of scorn. "Fine. Enjoy Thanksgiving alone." I stepped aside and opened the door for her. "Enjoy your loan application." She left. The silence she left behind was heavy. It was the silence of someone who had come expecting a flood of tears and had instead run into a locked door. An hour later, I was at my laptop. My work as an archivist had given me a deep, almost obsessive respect for primary sources, for documentation, for the patterns that emerge when you lay everything out in chronological order. Sloane Caldwell had a pattern. I logged into the public records database for the county court. It's a habit. When something feels wrong, I look for the paper trail. What I found would have been almost comical if my name wasn't so close to the blast radius. A small claims judgment for unpaid rent from 2 years ago. A credit card company that had taken her to court for a delinquent balance of $3,200. 2 other cards that, according to her credit report, which I accessed with a service I use, were maxed out. And a personal loan she'd taken out 10 months prior, for which she'd already missed 2 payments. Then I saw it, the detail that made my blood run cold. Her current car lease was 90 days from being in default, and my mother had tried to fix it. I found a public filing for a home equity line of credit, a HELOC taken out on my parents' house 6 months ago. Judith's name was on it, not my stepdad's, just hers. Suddenly, the suffocating pressure of the last few weeks made perfect, horrifying sense. They weren't just asking me for a favor. They weren't just trying to help Ainsley get a new toy. They were trying to plug a hole in a sinking ship with my good credit. They were trying to roll Ainsley's existing debt and negative equity into a massive new loan, a loan no bank would ever give her on her own, and they needed my name to do it. Once I saw that, my mind's archive started cross-referencing everything. The emergency, $500 I'd sent her for a dental procedure last year. The $1,000 I'd covered for a security deposit on an apartment she later abandoned. The countless Venmo transfers labeled groceries, gas, help over the last decade. I spent 2 hours going through my old bank statements and digital payment records. I made a spreadsheet, dates, amounts, reasons given. Not gifts, not joyful, freely given generosity. This was pressure money, peacekeeping money. Money I had spent transaction by transaction to buy a few quiet weeks at a time. The final number at the bottom of the column stared back at me from the screen. $21,750. That number sat in my chest heavier than the adoption reveal, because one secret hurt my feelings. This number explained my function. I barely slept. The next afternoon, my grandmother Eleanor called. She lived 20 minutes away in a little cedar-shingled house that always smelled of beeswax, old books, and strong tea. "Come over," she said. Her voice was raspy but clear. "I made soup, and I'm too old to waste time asking twice." Grandma Eleanor never wasted words. She was the matriarch of our family, but she didn't rule with noise or drama. She ruled with a quiet, unshakable clarity. She never confused softness with weakness. When I walked in, she took one look at my face, at the dark circles under my eyes, and sighed. "So," she said, taking the pot off the stove, "she finally used it." I stopped in the middle of taking off my coat. "You knew?" She set the ladle down with a soft clink. "I knew there was a version of the truth your mother kept locked away for emergencies," she said. "I just never thought she'd be selfish enough to turn it into a weapon." We sat at her small oak kitchen table as the rain drummed against the window panes. I wanted a grand explanation, a tidy narrative that would make sense of the last 48 hours. Instead, she gave me a story. "When I was 30, she said, stirring her tea, your grandfather invested our savings in a friend's business. It went sour. He lost a lot of money. And when I asked to see the books, he told me that a good wife just trusts her husband. You know what I learned, Sloane?" She looked right at me. Her eyes were the same pale blue as mine. "I learned that some people say the word trust when what they really mean is silence. I stayed silent for a whole year, and we nearly lost this house because of it." She took a sip of her tea. "Family can ask for help," she said. "Family cannot demand blindness." That was more useful than any platitude. It was more helpful than all the flowery language people use to sound wise. It was just true. Then she reached into a drawer in the old wooden hutch behind her. She pulled out a flat gray archival folder, the kind I used at work. She slid it across the table toward me. "Your mother doesn't know I made copies of everything," she said quietly. Inside was a stack of paperwork, official-looking documents from an adoption agency in Eugene, dated 1988. A formal letter confirming the finalization, and a handwritten note from a social worker. Tucked in the very back was something else, a sealed envelope, the paper yellowed with age. On the front, in elegant fading cursive, it said, "For my daughter." My fingers went numb. Grandma Eleanor watched me. "It's a letter from your birth mother," she said. "It was supposed to be given to you when you turned 21. If you wanted it." I stared at the envelope. 21. I was 35, 14 years. It had been sitting in a drawer waiting. I couldn't breathe. I looked up at her, and the question that had been burning inside me finally broke through. Did Judith keep it from me on purpose?" My grandmother's mouth tightened into a thin, grim line. I think, she said carefully, that at first she told herself she was protecting you. Then she told herself she was protecting her place in your life. Then 1 year became 5, 5 became 10. And then it had just been too long to ever admit what she'd done. She nodded toward the folder. And now, she said, her voice laced with a cold disappointment I had never heard from her before, now she's using the very secret she kept from you to try and collect a payment she hasn't earned. Affection that requires a signature is not affection. It is a transaction. I didn't read the letter until after midnight, back in my own apartment, with every single light turned on. My hands were trembling as I carefully slit the envelope open. My birth mother's name was Isabel Vargas. She was 19 when I was born. The letter wasn't dramatic, and that somehow was the most devastating part. It was simple, it was careful, it was hopeful, and so deeply, achingly ordinary. She wrote that she was a music student, that she loved the rain, that she was signing the papers because she wanted me to have the stability and the opportunities that she couldn't yet provide. She wrote that she hoped I had a laugh that came easily. She wrote that if I ever found this letter, she wanted me to know that my existence was not a mistake, that I was not a burden, that I was from the very beginning an act of love. No hidden family fortune, no dramatic plot twist, just love without possession, love without bookkeeping. I folded the pages back together and sat on my sofa as the city grew quiet outside. I sat there until the first gray light of dawn started to filter through the blinds, and I heard my mother's voice from 2 nights ago, playing over and over in my head. Maybe it's time you knew. She'd said it like she was handing down a punishment, as if my own origin story was a weapon she had the right to deploy. By morning, the grief had burned itself out, and what was left was clarity, cold, hard, and absolute. I wasn't apologizing, I wasn't co-signing. And I was not, under any circumstances, walking into Thanksgiving dinner unarmed. I spent the next day doing what I do best. I organized, I built a file. I printed out my spreadsheet. Financial support provided to Sloane Caldwell, 2011-2023, $21,750, itemized. I printed out the public records of Ainsley's judgments and the filing for my mother's HELOC. I made a high-quality scan of Isabel Vargas's letter and a copy of the other adoption documents Grandma Eleanor had given me. I put the originals in a safe place. Then that afternoon, I found the last piece of the puzzle. It arrived by accident. Ainsley, in her haste to forward a Thanksgiving menu planning email to the whole family, attached the wrong file. It was a PDF from the car dealership, a finance application worksheet. And at the top, under the section labeled Co-Applicant, was my name, Sloane Caldwell, not blank, not left for discussion, typed in, with my job title at the museum listed correctly and a slightly outdated but close enough version of my annual salary. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just pressure. This wasn't just a desperate, clumsy attempt to persuade me. They had already started the paperwork. They had taken my personal information and given it to a third party, all in the confident expectation that their emotional blackmail would work. That was the moment. The exact moment this stopped being a messy family drama in my mind and became something else. This was attempted financial fraud wrapped in a bow of family obligation. My mother called again that evening. Her voice was syrupy sweet this time, which was always a bad sign. "Sloane, darling, I really think we need to clear the air before Thursday." "We can," I said, my voice calm, "but I'm not apologizing." A sharp exhale on her end. "You are making this into something so much bigger than it is." "No," I said. "You made it bigger. You made it bigger when you told me my place at the Thanksgiving table was conditional on me financing Ainsley's new car. That is not what I said." "Good," I replied. "Then you'll have no problem clarifying that in front of everyone on Thursday." Silence. Then, her voice much smaller, "You just don't understand the pressure Ainsley is under." "Oh, I think I understand it perfectly," I said. "I also understand she listed me as a co-applicant on a loan worksheet before I ever agreed to it." Another silence. This one was different. Not outrage. It was the sound of calculation, the sound of someone realizing they'd been caught. "You've been digging," she said. "It was an accusation." "I'm an archivist, Mom," I told her. "I call it reading the primary sources." She tried one last, desperate pivot, back to the old playbook. "After everything I have done for you," she said, her voice thick with manufactured hurt, "I just thought you'd show a little more gratitude." I almost had to admire her. In the space of 1 week, she had cycled through guilt, emotional warfare, and now a demand for gratitude. She was like a burglar trying a set of old, worn-out keys on a brand-new lock. "Gratitude," I said, letting the word hang in the air between us, "is not a line of credit." Then I hung up the phone. Thanksgiving arrived with that pale, watery sunlight you only get in the Pacific Northwest in late November. The air was cold and still. I dressed carefully. Black trousers, a simple cashmere sweater in a warm ivory color, small gold earrings. I wore the expression I usually reserved for board meetings where an important acquisition was being discussed, the expression that says, I have read the minutes. I have seen the budget, and I have brought receipts. In my leather tote bag was the gray archival folder. Inside it, the printed spreadsheet, the public records, the copy of the letter, and a decision that felt as solid and real as the pavement under my feet. No matter what happened in that house, I was done serving as this family's emotional and financial collateral. My mother opened the door before I could even knock, as if she'd been watching for my car through the window. The house smelled of roasting turkey and cinnamon. The lights on their little decorative tree glowed softly. Holiday music drifted from a speaker in the kitchen. To any outsider, it would have looked like a portrait of warmth. Inside, it felt like a stage. Ainsley was in the living room, wearing a tight burgundy dress, her smile a little too bright, her eyes darting to her phone every 30 seconds. My Uncle Marcus stood by the fireplace, nursing a glass of cider, expertly pretending not to feel the tension crackling in the air. And in her usual armchair, my grandmother Eleanor sat with the quiet, formidable posture of a woman who has survived decades of family holidays and knows better than to waste energy on forced pleasantries. I handed my mother the bottle of wine I'd brought, said a general hello to the room, and took a seat on the sofa, placing my tote bag on the floor beside me. Dinner was a masterclass in avoidance. We talked about the weather. We talked about a new exhibit at my museum. We talked about my Uncle Marcus's golf game. It was all surface, all brittle cheerfulness. It lasted exactly 22 minutes. Then my mother set down her fork with a delicate clink. "Before we have dessert," she said, looking at the center of the table, "I think there's something we all need to address." Of course there was. The main course was over. It was time for the main event. Ainsley immediately stared down at her plate, her shoulders slumping in a perfect performance of fragile distress. I placed my napkin on the table. I took a slow sip of water. "Go ahead, Mom." Judith fixed me with the look, the disappointed matriarch, a look she had perfected over 35 line years. "This family," she began, her voice resonating with false nobility, "has always, always shown up for each other. I think what happened this week was unfortunate. It was emotional. It was unnecessary. Your sister is in a difficult position, Sloane. She needs our help. You refused rather harshly. And what I said to you on the phone," she paused, taking a breath to frame herself as the wounded party, "it came from a place of deep hurt. I almost had to respect the sheer artistry of the edit. It was a masterpiece of omission. You told me I wasn't welcome for Thanksgiving unless I apologized," I said, my voice even and clear. "Then you told me I was adopted as a tactic to force me to co-sign a luxury car loan for Ainsley." Ainsley's head snapped up. "It's not a luxury car. That is such a nasty way to put it." I reached into my bag. I pulled out the first document from the gray folder and slid it across the table toward her. It was the dealership's spec sheet she had accidentally emailed me. Oyster-colored leather interior. I read aloud, "Panoramic sunroof, premium all-weather package, upgraded sound system. It's a luxury car, Ainsley." No one touched the paper. It sat in the middle of the table like a bomb. My mother's face lost a shade of color. Ainsley tried a different tactic. Anger. Why are you doing this? Why are you acting like I committed some kind of crime? Because you listed me as a co-applicant on a loan worksheet before I agreed to anything, I said calmly. That's why. A fact is not an attack. It is just a fact. My Uncle Marcus finally looked up from his plate, his brow furrowed. You did what, Ainsley? Her eyes darted from him to my mother, then back to me, wide with panic. It was preliminary. The finance guy said we should just put a name down to run the numbers. Don't, I said. It was the sharpest I'd let my voice get. Do not lie to me, not about this. Preliminary doesn't explain how he got my employer, my salary range, and my home address correct. My mother straightened her shoulders. Sloane, that is enough. No, I said, my voice dropping but gaining weight. Enough was about $20,000 ago. Enough was when every holiday started to feel like I was paying an invoice. Enough was when you decided to weaponize the secret of my birth because I finally, for the first time, said no. That landed, harder than the paperwork. The room went so quiet I could hear the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My mother's voice was a raw whisper. I raised you. You did, I agreed, and I have been grateful for that. I have shown you that gratitude in 100 different ways. Some of them, I said, sliding the next document from my folder, were direct deposited. I placed the spreadsheet on the table. Financial support provided to Sloane Caldwell, 2011-2023, $21,750. I said into the silence, in payments, transfers, and direct bailouts, for rent, for car repairs, for deposits, for emergencies. All for Ainsley. Uncle Marcus leaned forward, picking up the paper. Grandma Eleanor didn't move. She just watched my mother. Ainsley looked like she was going to be sick. That's not fair, she stammered. You're making it sound so transactional. It became transactional, I corrected her. The moment my seat at this table was made conditional on your car loan, my mother tried to regain control. Families help each other, Sloane. That's what they do. Families ask, I said, looking directly at her. They don't issue ultimatums. They don't forge paperwork. And they damn well don't pull sealed adoption records out of a drawer like a grenade just because they aren't getting their way. Ainsley pushed her chair back slightly. Mom didn't mean it like that. And then my grandmother Eleanor spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through everything else. Then how exactly did she mean it, Ainsley? That simple question hung in the air. My mother looked at Eleanor, a flash of pure panic in her eyes, then looked away. I was upset, she mumbled. Upset is slamming a door, Grandma Eleanor said, her voice like ice. What you did, Judith, was strategic. Uncle Marcus put his glass down. Judith, he said, and his tone had shifted. He was no longer a bystander. Is there more to this? Is the house in trouble? I opened the gray folder one last time. I took out the copy of Isabel Vargas's letter. There is, I said. I placed it on the table, though I kept my hand on it. This is a letter from my birth mother. It was supposed to be given to me when I was 21. It wasn't. I saw it for the first time 3 days ago, because Grandma kept a copy. Not because you gave it to me. My mother looked truly, genuinely frightened then. That was new. Sloane, don't. No. You don't get to use my name softly right now. You don't get to act like we're on the same side of this. My entire identity was held as a secret and then used as leverage. Ainsley was staring at my mother, her face pale. She whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Mom, you told me she always knew. My head whipped around to face her. She told you that. Ainsley's expression was all the confirmation I needed. My mother hadn't just lied to me. She'd lied in both directions. To me, she'd framed the revelation as a spontaneous, heat-of-the-moment cruelty. But to Ainsley, she had apparently pretended I was in on the secret all along, which made her own actions seem less monstrous. It made me complicit in my own erasure. That was the final crack, and everything came pouring through. Uncle Marcus, now looking grim, asked again about the house. Ainsley, finally stripped of all her defenses, started crying. Actually crying, not performing. She admitted the car lease was about to be repossessed. She admitted the credit cards were over their limits. She admitted she'd quit her last job 2 months ago without another one lined up, a fact she'd hidden from all of us. The new SUV, she sobbed, wasn't just a want, it was a desperate, stupid plan. The dealership told her they could roll all the negative equity from her old lease into a new loan, but only with a pristine cosigner. That was me. I was the pristine cosigner. My mother, it turned out, had already drained over $10,000 from the home equity line of credit to keep Ainsley's various financial fires from burning down the whole forest. She was terrified my stepdad would find out. Uncle Marcus stared at his sister, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. So this whole week, he said slowly, this entire Thanksgiving meltdown was about trying to hide one string of bad decisions behind an even bigger one. And you were going to use Sloane's good name to do it. My mother said nothing, which was, of course, the loudest answer of all. I stood up. The table felt too small. The whole room felt too small. Here is what happens now, I said, and my voice was steady. 1, I am not signing anything, not now, not ever. 2, I am not apologizing for protecting myself. 3, if I find that my personal information has been formally submitted on any credit application without my written, notarized consent, this conversation will be over. And the next one will be with a lawyer. Ainsley looked up, horrified. You'd report us? I held her gaze. I would protect myself, I said. The fact that this surprises you is the whole problem. Then I turned to my mother. And 4, you will never, ever again use my adoption or my relationship to my birth mother as a tool for control. You don't get to rank my belonging in this family. If you want a relationship with me moving forward, it will be built on honesty, not on ownership. Her eyes filled with tears, but I had crossed tears off the list of approved currencies. I was afraid, she whispered, afraid of losing you. I picked up my folder from the table. Then you should have tried trusting me, I said. Fear is not a substitute for respect, and control is not the same thing as closeness. No one spoke. The dessert sat on the sideboard untouched. Outside the window, it had started to rain again. I didn't stay to clean up. That was important. The old Sloane would have stayed. She would have managed everyone's feelings. She would have mediated and soothed and translated the pain she'd just exposed into something more comfortable for the people who had caused it. The new Sloane put on her coat while the air in the room was still raw and sharp with truth. Uncle Marcus walked me to the door. Is there anything else I need to know? He asked quietly. About the house? The paperwork? Pull the HELOC statements going back a year, I told him, and stop accepting vague answers as a form of communication. He almost smiled, noted. In the hallway, Ainsley caught my arm. Sloane, wait, I turned. She looked small and lost without her usual armor of bravado. I didn't think it would go this far. That's because it never has before, I said, not unkindly. Someone has always stepped in and cleaned up the mess before you had to look at the damage. She started crying again, harder this time. I'm scared, she said. I believed her. For the first time, fear was doing the work that lectures never could. Good, I said. Be scared. Now use it. Call the dealership tomorrow and cancel everything. Sell the designer coat. Get on a payment plan with the credit card companies. Get a second job. For once in your life, do the hard thing yourself before asking 5 other people to do it for you. She looked at me, stunned, as if no one had ever handed her the unvarnished manual for adulthood before. Maybe no one had. I left before my mother could emerge from the living room. The cold, damp air felt clean in my lungs. My boots crunched on the wet leaves in the driveway. And for the first time in my adult life, I drove home from a family holiday not feeling like I had just paid a terrible price for peace. I felt like I had finally refused to be collected. The fallout was swift. 2 days later, Uncle Marcus called. He'd reviewed the financials. The amount Judith had pulled from the HELOC was closer to $15,000. Not enough to lose the house, but enough to expose a long, secret pattern of financial triage. This time there were consequences, real ones. Uncle Marcus, with my stepdad's bewildered agreement, took over the family's finances until the line of credit was paid down and stabilized. Ainsley canceled the application for the SUV. She sold off a surprising amount of clothing and furniture online. She moved into a smaller, much cheaper apartment at the end of her lease and got a second job waiting tables in the evenings. My mother was apparently furious with me for the public humiliation for exactly 1 week. Then, once the full scope of the debt had to be spoken aloud and dealt with, she was simply tired. The performance of outrage requires energy she no longer had. As for me, I placed a freeze on my credit. I sent a certified letter to the car dealership stating that no application with my name on it was ever authorized, and I bought a fireproof lockbox for my important documents, something I should have done years ago. Then I did the hardest part. I did nothing. I didn't chase. I didn't send a long, soul-bearing email explaining my feelings. I didn't call to check if my mother was okay with the boundaries I had set, because a boundary that requires the other person's permission isn't a boundary. It's just a request. 3 weeks passed, 4. Then in late January, a small package arrived from my mother. Inside was a little rosewood box, no note on top. I opened it. There was a tiny silver locket on a faded chain, my first piece of jewelry, the first pair of soft-soled shoes I ever wore, and tucked beneath them the original creased copy of Isabel Vargas's letter. Underneath it all was a single handwritten page. Sloane, I always told myself I kept that letter because I was afraid it would make me less of a mother to you. But the truth is uglier. A part of me wanted to be the only beginning you ever knew. When you stopped doing what I asked, I used your story cruelly. There is no version of that I can defend. I am sorry. Not for being hurt, but for what I chose to do with that hurt. I read it 3 times. It didn't magically fix 2 decades of dysfunction. It wasn't supposed to. But it was the first completely honest thing she had written to me in years. A week later, Ainsley texted me. No drama, no manipulation, just sold the old car. The serving job sucks. I hate that you were right. A second text came a minute later, which probably means you were right. I actually laughed. Then I put my phone down and waited a full day to reply. Urgency had always been their drug of choice. This time I was working on my own schedule. My reply was 2 words. No extra praise, no lingering punishment, just clean, clear distance. That was new for all of us. That spring, through an intermediary service, I learned a little more about Isabel Vargas. She had become a high school music teacher in Arizona. She had married, had 2 sons, and she had passed away from cancer several years before I ever saw her letter. The grief was strange. Not a sharp pain for a person I'd lost, but a quiet, hollow ache for a conversation I had arrived too late to have. Still, knowing her story changed me. Not because it gave me a new identity, but because it clarified my old one. My life had not begun as a debt to be repaid. It had begun as a profound act of love, followed by years of genuine care, followed by years of corrosive control. And it was vital to understand that those things were not the same. A year later, at the next Thanksgiving, the shape of our family had changed. The silence itself felt different, healthier. I arrived with a single bottle of wine and a gift for my grandmother. I had no desire to audition for a role I had already retired. The house was quieter, the conversation less polished, more real. Ainsley drove up in a sensible 5-year-old sedan she had bought herself, with a small car loan she had qualified for on her own. No one made a big deal out of it, and that was the healthiest part. Growth doesn't always need a round of applause. Sometimes it just needs to quietly park in the driveway without dragging anyone else's name into the financing. Later, my mother and I were alone in the kitchen for a moment. She was drying a plate. I still don't know how to live with what I did, she said, not looking at me. I leaned against the counter. Maybe you're not supposed to, I answered honestly. Maybe you just live with it, and you let it make you different. She nodded. Are we okay? I looked out the window over the sink, at the reflection of the warm kitchen lights against the dark night. I think we're real, I said, and that's probably better. She set the plate down, and she didn't argue. Here's the lesson I had to learn the hard way. It's the lesson I should have known from my work as an archivist. Treat financial agreements with family with the same clarity and documentation you would use with a stranger. Not because you expect betrayal, but because clarity is a form of kindness. It protects the relationship from the crushing weight of unspoken expectations and emotional leverage. Clarity is the fence that protects the garden. The old me believed that love meant blurring the lines. It meant saying yes to keep the peace. It meant absorbing the costs, financial and emotional, to keep the family system running. But peace that is purchased with your own diminishment is not peace. It is a ceasefire you are paying for. And love that cannot survive a simple, respectful no was never love to begin with. It was just a contract where you never got to read the fine print. So let me ask you this. Have you ever found yourself paying for peace in a relationship? Not with money, maybe, but with your silence, with your agreement, with the slow, steady erosion of your own well-being? What was the price of that peace? And when did you realize it was too high?